Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is Geopolitics, Policy, and the New Global Landscape for Advanced Therapies. So advanced therapies are being really reshaped by geopolitics, financing shifts, and emerging regional capabilities. Even today, there have been some interesting regulatory shifts if you've been paying attention to the news. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about how the momentum for mRNA in the U.S. has really softened recently. And we'll talk about the implications for mRNA research in general and for biotech companies. So without further ado, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Samar, you can go first.
Hello everyone, I'm Samar Mohanty. I'm co-founder, president and chief scientific officer of Nanoscope Therapeutics, a company developing gene agnostic and disease agnostic gene therapy that can democratize gene therapy across different diseases. I also had the regulatory.
Good afternoon. I'm Roberta, Duncan. Thank you for having me. I am an executive on the board of the mRNA Alliance for mRNA Medicines, AMM, a consortium of over 100 member organizations that reflect the academic, supplier, manufacturer, sponsor aspect of mRNA. We're focused on advancement and advocacy for mRNA and mRNA-enabled technologies. I was formerly the Chief Strategy Officer at Arcturus Therapeutics, which is in the space of infectious disease and rare therapeutic treatments for cystic fibrosis and also for ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, and previously led the mRNA franchise for CSL. So I have about 30 years of experience in the industry and maybe just about 10 in mRNA.
I am Michael Myers. That is my real name, not my stage name. Michael Myers. I am vice chair at H.C. Wainwright. We are approximately 120 people, an investment bank, full service corporate and institutional investment bank, supporting the life sciences industry with a focus on large cap pharma, and then all sizes of biotech, life sciences companies, medical devices, and diagnostics. I've also been in the industry about 30 years now. Started at Hambrecht and Quist in research, biotech research, and then industry for some time. Cowen and Company, Merrill Lynch, then on the buy side, and then back to investment banking about 15 years ago. I have 4 practice areas, primary practice areas: traditional mergers advisory, licensing advisory, most often for licensors, innovative companies, licensors of assets, private credit, and then royalty monetization. So thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Michael. So we have a tremendous amount of diversified experience up here. I am your moderator, Heather McKenzie, senior editor at BioSpace, which is a leading digital publication for the biopharma industry. And my focus areas, I would say, are gene therapy, neuro, and rare diseases. So without further ado, let's get started with our first question. So the investment landscape for advanced therapies has shifted in the past couple of years. How should companies be diversifying their portfolios to respond?
Clearly, the regulatory landscape needs to be taken into consideration when companies are considering portfolio investments, diversification. One of the key independent variables, of course, into any investment decision is the risk of any given investment. And we've certainly seen, and I know we're going to get into this today on the panel, geographic risk profiles that have really shifted these last couple of years. We think favoring areas to a large degree outside of the U.S. from a geopolitical, not speaking to the technology basis for that statement, but from a geopolitical perspective, regulatory perspective, government, even NGO perspective, we think areas like Europe broadly, APAC, suggest that companies' portfolios should be diversified where country risk, regional risk is lessened a bit, perhaps as compared to the US. On the other side of that, we continue to believe as a firm that is active, both my research analyst colleagues, we have 18 publishing research analysts in life sciences alone, many of them covering cell and gene therapies, that the modalities have really continued to advance. And so I think this sort of juxtaposition of geopolitical or regional risk as compared to modalities, targets, and different approaches, cell and gene therapy, continue to favor, global investment.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the changes that are happening from a geopolitical perspective, we're also seeing it affect the clinical trial space as well. So you're seeing that patients are willing, we heard this morning from some of our patient advocates, that patients are willing to travel in order to access clinical trials that are available to them and advanced therapies. So we have to take into consideration that as we look at where clinical trials are taking place, we look at distributed manufacturing, where you're getting manufacturing at access points for patients, all of that begins to play a role. So in my mind, I think there are a few things that come to mind when you think about diversification. One of it is geography. We can no longer treat multinational access as a luxury. It is a requirement, quite frankly. The other aspect you touched on, which is the modalities, a shift from single asset to platform modalities, so that you're getting multiple indications off of a platform. Your investment into that platform is you're getting your ROI. But in addition to that, I think the third space is agility. So the ability to be agile in your portfolio, be agile in your manufacturing capacity, be agile in how you access patients underpins all of that.
Roberta, sorry, just before, just wanted a follow-up question for you. With your specific focus on mRNA, obviously we've seen Moderna pivot in the past couple of days, even today, with a new partnership with Mexico. Is this something that you're seeing other companies kind of scramble to do?
So pivoting, there are a couple of things to take into consideration. So when we think about what's available, let me just kind of answer that question in two parts. From a manufacturing perspective, we have global manufacturing capacity in mRNA on every continent, including Africa now with BioNTech's investment in their manufacturing in Rwanda. But as you think about that component and you look at the U.S. with regard to how we're facing headwinds in mRNA, yes, you will see companies like Moderna making changes, but you are seeing investment coming in. You're seeing, I think it's BioNTech that just got FDA fast-tracked for their HBV solid tumor asset that they're taking into the clinic. So we are seeing that there is a shift that's happening. The sands are still shifting. Investment is still happening. It has softened in some areas with rhetoric that we're hearing out of the U.S. administration, but we have seen additional investment in cancer immunotherapies. We're seeing additional investment in rare and ultra-rare diseases. We're seeing personalized medicine and precision medicine become much, much more of a focus, which means that manufacturing capacity that we have globally is great for pandemic level scale, massive manufacturing. That manufacturing capacity now needs to be pivoted to miniaturization, modularization that allows you to then have closer to point of care treatments.
Thank you. Samar, what's your perspective here?
Yeah, I think I agree with the two most important is diversifying to geographies and the modalities across whether it's mRNA or cell gene therapy. But also two important addition I want to talk is about what stage your company is, whether you're a clinical stage company or a commercial stage company. For example, I can give you an example where for a clinical stage you go to Europe, and if you are having a population which is pediatric, you have additional requirement of pediatric study, which is not required in US. So there are certain advantage and disadvantage in different buckets that you have to see whether you are going commercial versus clinical. Second one is the prevalence of the population, the disease. mRNA may not be very suitable or attractive in one regulatory or geopolitical environment, but that can be the technology and all resources can be for oncology and be implemented. So the companies need to think strategically what's the geopolitical environment. And for example, for us, we are developing a inherited blindness or retinal degenerative disease. There can be areas like MENA or somewhere where prevalence is 5 times more than in the US or in Europe, which is more diverse, so many countries. But there, maybe focusing there is more important. So you have to see the disease indication, stage of your program, geography, and of course the modality, where it fits best the environment.
Okay, yeah. Michael,
maybe as a corollary to this discussion, I wanted to mention in terms of mRNA and for that matter, siRNA and other uses of RNA broadly, clearly what we saw during the pandemic was the use of mRNA technology for an infectious disease. And so we remain bullish on RNA as a technology. I think Roberta made a point about manufacturing capacity and the industrial scale that we saw created around this technology. I think in terms of portfolio diversification as well, we would be smart to think about CDMOs as part of the supply chain. So, my mindset is often very therapeutics focused. I think the supply chain, which is represented broadly here at Advanced Therapies Week, is another way to think about a range of modalities, including other cell and gene therapies.
Now, if the mRNA, we've got a really good global manufacturing base for mRNA. I know you mentioned that, Roberta. Are they set up to pivot to these other modalities?
So there are very few commercial manufacturers of mRNA. You've got Pfizer, Moderna, and Arcturus. Those are the three. Arcturus has manufacturing capacity and capabilities with their commercialized product Kostaive in Japan, and Moderna and Pfizer has capacity in various countries. So when we talk about that globally distributed manufacturing capacity, it is maintained through a select group of manufacturers, but also through the CDMO network. So that ability to pivot is there, but it does require some innovation. And there are some things that we do need to still overcome with mRNA. For instance, the one I think that may stand out to everyone is thermostability. The majority of mRNA, including self-amplifying mRNA, is still at extremely low temperatures requiring cold chain. So the advancement in thermostability the improvements in thermostability will allow us to access other routes of administration, other treatments, and be able to bring that to patients. But what we have at a global scale, we do need to work towards miniaturization, modularization. So normally we worry about scaling up. Now we're worrying about bringing it back down to actually be able to leverage it at point of care.
Okay, all right. So speaking of Moderna again, this is a little bit of an mRNA-focused question. Moderna would be backing away from late-stage vaccine trials of its mRNA products. So with the U.S. really kind of not backing mRNA as much as it used to, will other governments step up? And if so, where?
Well, it's unfortunate Moderna took that decision, but it's understandable given everything that the headwinds that they're facing. But the reality is that the administration has been very clear in its position around vaccines in particular. So not just mRNA, but vaccines across the board. What we've seen happen through this change in perspective in the U.S. is we've seen other agencies step up. We've seen other geographies step in. We've seen Australia, for instance, is very invested in mRNA technology and in cell gene therapy and in advancing therapies. We've seen the UK further invest in mRNA. We've seen HERA investment and about €1 billion investment in manufacturing in the European Union, and we're also seeing, which is very interesting, and it affects more than mRNA. It's across all the advanced therapies. We're seeing quite an infusion and growth of biotech capacity and industrialization in the Middle East. And so with that advancement, we are seeing that other geographies are taking steps to invest. We are seeing that they are attracting U.S. biotechs into the region. We are seeing that those advances are not at this point in time going to completely offset what we see happening in the U.S., but this is the beginning of that story, so that investment continues. The one caveat that raises a concern is what happens with the U.S. if that investment doesn't come back in, and that is something we're all watching. Or the reality is the investment is already beginning to come back in, but at the pace is what we'd like to see pick up. And also how our biotech is going to bridge this period of time with this administration in place. And so with that, my takeaway to all of you is data, continue to generate the data and drive the science that brings the innovation, because that is what's required regardless of what administration is in order for our regulatory partners to review and make decisions that actually bring treatments to patients, because patients are still waiting and public health still requires protection.
What about for other advanced therapies, for cell and gene therapies? What countries are really, obviously the U.S. has the FDA has put a lot behind that, and Secretary Kennedy has indicated his support for those therapies. But what other countries are really coming to the fore there?
Yeah, I can speak to that. As I was saying, so Europe has been very standard, no fluctuation in their policies. They have prime and other mechanism for all the ATMPs. But if you see Japan, for example, we have very good interaction with Japan, and we are hearing with their Sakigake designation, they have been the most, prolific now expansion into the programs. We got Sakigake designation. I can tell you, I never had such regulatory interaction where almost every alternate day they were giving feedback through emails, not formal meetings and stuff. So we have very good experience, of course, with FDA, with RMAT and Fast Track, all those. But Japan is regulatory-wise innovation that they have done is really commendable. But from a perspective of streamlining, like regulatory is not the only part. The manufacturing, the clinical trial, investigator-initiated trials, and regulatory, all China has done tremendous job. So that's why you'll see the CAGR or whatever is, you'll see in cell gene therapy that's projected around 18%, but it's growing at 24% and going to grow more if talents and everything move towards an investment moves to the APAC region. So APAC has been growing quite more, I will say.
Right. Yeah. All right, thank you.
And I could actually add some firsthand experience. I mean, Arcturus got approval for Kostaive in Japan, and that relationship through our partner Meiji Pharmaceutical, through Arcturus's partner Meiji Pharmaceutical, and in partnership with CSL, was actually a really interesting interaction with the PMDA, with, again, continuous engagement, continuous feedback that allowed us to really progress approval there rather quickly. So it's not just limited to the cell and gene therapy space and rare disease. It's also in the infectious disease space. I think the PMDA in Japan has demonstrated that they are invested in bringing treatments into their population and protecting their population, and they've stepped up. We know historically Japan, the East, Japan in particular, was particularly slow in their regulatory process. I don't think they're in that era any longer.
Speaking of regulatory processes, how do the regulatory pathways for advanced therapies compare around the world? It'd be good if you start, Samar.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the question?
So how do the regulatory pathways for advanced therapies compare around the world? So in APAC, in the US, in Europe?
Yeah, so I'll say that definitely it's like bifurcated. If you consider US, like in one side we see in last fall, US has like 3 separate guidance from cell gene therapy, whether you talk about innovative clinical trial design, Bayesian statistics, or post-market, surveillance, where pharmacovigilance become very important for cell gene therapy because we have seen some safety issues, which is important. The CMC relaxation that FDA put, that not 3 PPQ batch is mandatory, there is flexibility around that. Then of course there is tremendous expedited program in cell gene therapies like fast track, RMAT, and breakthrough, all this. So we find the interaction with regulators, especially the reviewers, great in US, but as I was mentioning, I was pleasantly surprised with the interaction with Japan and China, of course, with the investigator-initiated trials. They are the regulators. What we are hearing is that's being designed, the policies were designed by engineers. Here it's designed by lawyers. So what they're saying, engineers want efficiency. They know how to move it very fast and get to, so that's why we're saying that's attracting investment or any BD deal. I think Michael can speak to that. Europe have been very steady. As I mentioned, they have conditional approval, marketing authorization approval. Japanese, for example, earlier, not only it was slow, there was a requirement of having Japanese population. In our case, for example, they said no Japanese population trial is required. That's tremendous. Not only that, they even allowed the drug to be used across indications. Our Sakigake designation we got across 10 different diseases in the retina, which we did not get from US or Europe. So they are advancing at a very rapid pace. I think APAC regions is being very flexible in the pathway, expediting, bringing therapy to market.
Okay, yeah, we've heard a lot about patient access today, so it sounds like they're doing an excellent job.
And so from the regulatory perspective, I think what we're seeing is, while we all want to see harmonization, I think what we're seeing is an element, and what Samar has pointed to, is an element of modernization of our regulatory pathways, which is critically important. Within the U.S., one of the challenges we've seen is that as guidances have come out, they aren't easily implementable. So that's one of the challenges we're facing here. The plausible mechanism pathway is a great first start, but there is an ability to actually implement that needs to be figured out. When we look at the Bayesian guidance, it isn't markedly different than the guidance that existed previously. So while we're seeing some changes, they're directional, right? And so we want to continue to see follow through in those spaces. One of the other areas that we have to be careful of, and this is not necessarily regulatory space, it's on the policy side. What we're seeing in the U.S. are the policy threats that are impacting not only mRNA enabling technologies, but all the adjacent technologies it advancing as well. So just to give an example, in South Carolina recently, the Alliance for mRNA Medicines was down there at the legislature actually battling the criminalization of mRNA administration. So at the state level, at the federal level, there are headwinds, and I just want to remind everyone that while we're seeing these headwinds in mRNA, any technology where the science is being challenged is a gateway for all technology and the science to be challenged. So the battlefront is on mRNA right now in certain areas, and we're going to continue to take that head on, but it is not in a vacuum. It is in support of innovation and technology across the board.
Is there regulatory clarity? And I don't want to pick on the U.S., but we've had some complete response letters recently, especially in the gene therapy space. There was one for Regenix Bio this past week. What's the status right now in terms of regulatory clarity?
Yeah, I can say definitely that's not what the field in rare disease need, where you have a randomized controlled trial. But if you see the leadership which has come in FDA and CBER specifically, they are directed towards evidence-based science, as they say, science-based evidence, but they want a randomized controlled trial. So the natural history as synthetic arm, they think is not properly matched. And that's why most of this CRL from clinical efficacy side, whether it's Atara, cell therapeutics company, you saw recent CRL, Regenix Bio now, uniQure programs, you see all these programs, the common theme from clinical side is lack of randomized controlled trial data, which is not feasible all the time, and that's what the previous guidance have been, that a biomarker is sufficient and things of that nature. So that's what we are seeing. From a CMC side, The other, most of the CRLs are also coming from, whether it's Ultragenics, Rocket, and all these are coming from CRL out of CMC manufacturing issues. But now with the new guidance that we are hearing on CMC from FDA on cell gene therapy, we hope that scene will change. There will be less CRLs. But I think safety is very important. Cell gene therapy space, as I was saying, there is now in a related product in RegenX Bio, you saw tumor formation, and in some other program, there was a SIDA Therapeutics has a directed evolution capsid, which led to death, patient death. LVDs in Sarepta, there was patient death. So FDA is trying to see that how they can balance safety and efficacy with very robust, pharmacovigilance.
And I would say our experience, where we've had the opportunity with a number of our clients to review under CDA FDA minutes, Type C minute, mostly Type C, but Type A meeting minutes as well. There are a couple of things that come to mind. One, so I'm going to be less cynical about the U.S. right now. One is that I believe certainly, and maybe I shouldn't say we, but I strongly believe that each trial, each application is reviewed on the basis of that application without real political intervention. And it's done at the reviewer level most of the time without intervention at the director level or even above that, at the deputy commissioner level or commissioner level. I do believe that. There are some exceptions. We've seen that in the past, but I think few and far between. Number two, I think in reviewing the minutes and the pressure that a lot of companies are under in the cell and gene therapy space, which are very expensive modalities, transfection, harvest transfection, certainly CMC broadly, is very expensive. There is pressure to, at times, not listen to the regulatory guidance. And brute force, we used to in combinatorial chemistry way back, talk about brute force approaches to creating new molecules, new scaffolds. There is sometimes, often, we see with companies that are under pressure to deliver on timelines and within a budget and limited capital resources to frankly ignore guidance from the agency. The agency will rarely say, you must do this, and they will look to sponsors to provide feedback and truly to have a two-way discussion. But we often see CRLs as, I wouldn't say predictable, that sounds arrogant, but where we will read FDA minutes and it is somewhat predictable, the outcome ultimately in terms of a CRL. So I believe the regulators want to work with the cell and gene therapy companies, and I think investors have a role to play in this too, and boards, and have to somehow be more supportive of companies to provide a bit more runway, for companies to be a little bit more conservative with the buy side expectations as well in terms of timelines and budgets, and really to work with the regulators as partners. FDA is a good partner generally, I think, generally.
And I would say that while all that you've said is true, the other piece that we need is for the agency to make themselves more accessible. And that is where we are seeing some changes that are on the positive side. We are seeing them opening up communication pathways. We are seeing them open up pilot programs that allow for that. So I think that is really going to also help reinforce whatever they're sending is not just in minutes, but there is an opportunity to have a dialogue and come to a common ground and really understand where that line in the sand is versus where you can come up with a creative solution that they're willing to accept. So it's the yes and. Yes, we need to be honest with ourselves about how much time it gets. Anyone on my team has heard me say it takes one woman to make one baby in 9 months. You can't get 3 women in 3 months making one baby, right? The time it takes is the time it takes. But it's really important that we allow the true development paths to happen, but also accelerate where acceleration makes sense, right? We have companies that get in their own way, teams that get in their own way, and we trip along ourselves. So, and that costs time, that costs money, that causes frustration. And at the end of the day, patients are waiting and public health still needs protection. So we can't get in our own way.
That's a fair point. I mean, I wonder if RMAT designation would be interesting. I'm sure the statistic is fairly easy to find, but whether companies that have been given RMAT designation maybe having more interaction with the agency have a greater probability percentage of approval, success, first-time application, or that's a very fair point in terms of access.
So now you're going to make me go look at the data.
So speaking of both regulatory guidance and regulatory clarity, one new policy from the FDA that I've really liked, and I know us journalists are having fun digging through them, is the real-time publication of CRLs. What are your thoughts on that? Has that helped? Is it going to help?
Yeah, I think definitely it's going to help if you, as Michael is saying, if you can see the communication and correlate it with maybe apply AI and develop some kind of, find the metrics, which are the intricate reason why something is, for example, in your filter validation, whether you are going to use buffer versus your real product. So things like very small things, but I think if you look into intricacies, we are finding a lot of similarities that why these products are getting CRL. Of course, we don't have in cell gene therapy, history has been very small, last 10 years, but we want to see, definitely is helpful, I will say. Looking into intricacy details of why it was given, then you can correct for it. Like Michael was saying, if you see that, even if it's not guidance given to you, you know what they have found in inspection, what they have seen.
I was going to say, it's important for us to see this, right? We're still dealing with nascent technologies. So anything that comes about that can give us insight into hurdles that we can avoid or overcome and how to overcome them is going to help get products through. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when companies are looking at mRNA, a lot of in the infectious disease space, a lot of us were looking at the data that was available on the filings for Moderna and Pfizer. There was a lot to learn, a lot to glean, to help with the development. So it is important to get access to that information. It is a bit of a mind flip that that the decision's been made to get it out that quickly and that transparently. So. It also sets the clarity for those who are still in development that you need to be in compliance with the guidance, back to Michael's point.
Yeah. One illustrative quote from a larger mid-cap, call it between $5 to $10 billion market cap company, to your question, Heather, about real-time publication of CRL. The quote was, "Yikes."
Yikes! Yeah, that's a
technical
good quote.
term. The technical
term.
Well, with our remaining time, I wonder if you guys have any final thoughts on this topic.
Well, I think one area we haven't really touched on specifically that I would like to leave with you as a parting thought is this aspect of scalability and agility and clarity. So we touched on clarity in the regulatory space, and we need to continue to see that come along. We're seeing it increase outside of the U.S. with pathways that are quite frankly comparable. The pathways are becoming quite comparable. But we also have some new access programs with one that is actually called Access, where you can have parallel submissions, right? So the ability to bring your product into multiple geographies at the same time to where the patients are is critically important. So the clarity and the speed. The speed needs to be in the place of cell gene therapy. We heard from our patient advocates that vein-to-vein time needs to decrease. We're moving from ex vivo to in vivo. We're seeing data come through. This all benefits the patient and being able to get treatment as quickly as possible. So we've got agility, we've got speed, and we've got clarity, and we need all three. They're not desirable, they're required.
I would say I'm extremely optimistic and bullish on the industry. broadly. I really am. And from, a manufacturing perspective, as we're going to more modular, scalable and modular manufacturing, being able to address ultimately cold chain, as I think Roberta raised earlier, and doing that within, within a degree on a modular basis to be able to address different venues and needs is exciting. Certainly, transfection technology, certainly autologous CAR T, which has had a bit of a hard time, as everyone is now talking about in vivo CAR Ts. T cells are still, to this banker, with humility given the audience here, is still the best therapeutic modality we've ever known. And then the ability, Samar, the ability to deliver genes, to edit genes, pan-gene, as your company is doing, pan-RP, as compared to one monogenetic, RP65, for example. The ability to deliver, pan-genes for genetic indications is here, is upon us. So I'm really, I think there might have been a martini in here.
Those are in a couple of hours now.
I'm very excited about the future of the industry. I really am, across the supply chain and modalities and platforms.
Thanks, Michael. All right, Samar?
Yeah, I think my fellow panelists covered it very well, but I echo the same optimism. That's why I'm in the field for last 20 years. So the science-driven approach, of course, the intention of what in cell gene therapy, especially space, we are hearing from regulators in the US is very optimistic, but how to implement that will take time, and that's why constant regulatory interaction is very necessary. We have seen the reviewers which are taking decision primarily that we are hearing, except they're very committed, and I think they're very stable in their input that they're providing and good guidance. Of course, we are limited by finances, as Michael was saying. That's why we try to take cuts out. We understand as industry, that's why we need in the whole ecosystem the participation of investor and the understanding that we discussed here. But I think implementing the regulatory view that the leadership is telling, but one area of like mRNA can impact others, in cell gene therapy, fear in the investors, and that's what is happening. So how to provide that confidence to investors is very important for us to survive and translate this to patients.
Okay, thanks, Samar. Well, you guys are part of this conversation too. Do you have any questions? There's the microphone right there.
Hi, Therapeutics here. We are, I think we are somehow in a moment that is historical. FDA has been really reviewing and being very heavy on the cell and gene therapies. Before, what we've seen is a more enabling FDA, and now we're seeing a more hammering FDA. Well, with Europe, with EMA, this situation has not changed. What we are completely ignoring is the elephant in the room, which is the Chinese development of clinical trials. There have been in 2025 more than 7,000 trials opened in China, compared to 7,400 in US in total, compared to 4,000 or 3,500 in Europe. So that means that something is really shifting. And whatever, if FDA continues to hammer, somebody else will get that part of reward. And that's what is going on, literally. So on the other side, I think on the cell and gene therapy side, which is really important, we need to start understanding whether FDA and other authorities can start to wake up and not give us a guideline readout that were about 10 to 15 years ago with viral validation, where we need to look more into other levels. And finally, to the point of Michael around the boards, yes, the boards need to be very patient because there are two levels there. One is the incompetence of the people that does the job that has not really done the, missing a viral validation. It's not a matter that you wait FDA to tell you. You should know to do it as far as you wake up. So that's not the point here. The point is, the board need to be diligent to make sure that all the work has been done before they vet for a submission, and not throw the people out there and see, let's see what FDA tells us. So this is really important. I mean, it's a matter of competence that we have been, in this area, has been lacking, to tell the truth. Just like we see people that keep selling stories of automation without understanding the sterility validation. This is really a crucial point. First thing first.
All right, thank you. Any comments?
So maybe I'll comment on both points. So tackling China first. We are seeing unprecedented generation of data in China, but this isn't a phenomenon that just happened overnight. Why I say this, I was in China in 2009, 2010, 2011, when the Chinese government through SMEs were building massive biotech parks that were empty. And they were filling them slowly through their sea turtles approach, which was bringing back talent into China. They were providing them with the latest and cutting edge technology, right? So that investment in technology that we're seeing the return on investment now happened almost 20 years ago. So if we talk about investment slowing down here in the US, again, think about the knock-on effect that happens down the road if we're no longer investing the way we should in innovation and basic science research, right? So it is not a flip of a switch, and we are seeing the outcomes of all of that investment. And we are beginning to see major deals being struck between strategics and companies at early stage development out of China, but also in China, they're getting to first in human and clinical data faster at record paces than we are now. The other elephant in the room is not just China in and of itself, but it's the guidelines and the rules that provide guidance towards safety that we don't necessarily clearly understand in comparison to what we expect in the US, in Europe, in Australia, and other geographies, Japan, et cetera. So it is something that we have to watch very closely. How do we accelerate without sacrificing safety and putting patients at risk? In regards to the manufacturing component, if I look at mRNA in particular, we're still struggling with the bookends, right? We can manufacture quickly, but to get your plasmid takes time. Analytical takes time. Release takes way too long, and fill finish is still low in capacity. So we have a lot to do. We have to remember it's still a nascent technology. Locking of processes is still something that's under development. So yes, I totally agree. What I hear you saying is the U.S. has to be regulatory needs to be a better partner to enable the speed and be engaged to answer the questions so that we're not showing up with a filing that's getting rejected or stymied in review. So I 100% agree with you. But I think when it comes to China, we also have to be balanced in our view of what the speed means and how do we leverage that speed. What we're seeing is we're hearing that patients are leaving the US and going to China to access therapies that are not available here because clinical trials are happening there. Globalization is important in this regard.
Yeah, I try not to echo, but I have to echo what Roberta's saying. In 2018, one of my partners, Will Ho, and I went for 3 weeks to China, Beijing, Shenzhen, and then a kind of a province of Shenzhen, Pingshan, which is one of the biotech parks that Roberta referenced. I think there were 6 or 8 biotech parks being established around the country at that time. And what struck me was 2 things. One, we met with the local municipality who said by 2025, we're in 26 now, this was 2018, we will rival San Francisco, Boston, Cambridge in terms of both domestic talent trained primarily in the US, but also in China. Coming back, I think they referred to it as 1,000 points of light, meaning the 1,000 most promising Chinese citizens who were educated, trained in the West, not just the US, but outside of China, and then encouraging some of the best from the West through 10-year tax holiday, housing subsidies. So this wasn't just wet labs, dry labs, manufacturing facilities. office space, but also housing, railways, roadways, infrastructure we saw that was nearly empty then in 18, even in 2018 when we visited. And there really was a concerted effort and a push to do this. We thought of China as being 20 years ago more conservative, the West more risk-taking, certainly the US. That has largely, certainly with this administration, that has largely changed as well. So I do think the roadmap was there, it was clear, and China innovation has been there for decades.
All right. Thank you. Well, can we get a big round of applause for these guys?